The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus said to his disciples, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, offer no resistance to the one who is evil. When someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn and offer the other one as well. If anyone wants to go to law with you over your tunic, hand over your cloak as well. Should anyone press you into service for 1 mile, go for 2 miles. Give to the one who asks of you, and do not turn your back on the one who wants to borrow. You have heard that it was said, 'You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that they may be children of your heavenly Father. For he makes his sun rise on the bad and the good, and causes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what recompense will you have? Do not the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what is unusual about that? Do not the pagans do the same? So be perfect, just as your heavenly Father is perfect." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
I'm sure that you all have heard of and read in school some of the writings of Mark Twain. He was an author of the last century. And one of the things that he wrote was, he said, look outside on a cold and rainy night. There was a man who was looking out his window. The rain was coming down. It was kind of like sleet. And he noticed that there was a little puppy sitting outside, sitting in this cold rain, and there was nobody near him. He didn't know how the puppy had gotten there. He said, so the man did what most people would do. He went outside and picked up the puppy, brought it inside, dried him off, perhaps set him in front of a fireplace or the heater or whatever to warm him up, fed him something to eat because the poor puppy was probably very hungry. And Mark Twain writes, that puppy will never bite that man. And Mark Twain writes, and that's the difference between dogs and humans. That's the difference between dogs and humans. This is Mark Twain. It's not Jesus Christ that said this. And when I read that the other day, I thought, this is very interesting. It refers a lot, or has a lot to do with what Jesus says in today's gospel. Because for the most part, we humans are most concerned about ourselves first. And that's kind of sad to say. And Jesus says, doesn't say today just to love your neighbor. He says to love your enemy. I don't know if we say we have enemies, but we certainly have people that annoy us, people that alienate us, or people that we have alienated in our lives. Jesus says, you know, what good is it if you just greet your brother but not your neighbor, or not somebody you don't know? And I was thinking, we live in these rented townhouses, and behind the townhouses there's a street, and then that's where we park, and that's where the dumpster is. We take our garbage. That's what the mailboxes are. So I was out there today walking the dog and checking our mailbox, and for the most part, when people come out of their townhouse to go back there, they just kind of ignore one another. I always try to at least give a nod. And sometimes when I'm walking my dog, I get a bigger response because I've got the dog. And one guy today said, "Oh, hi, puppy." You know, didn't say anything to me, but he said hi to the dog. But at least he acknowledged that I existed. And that sometimes is our problem, our Christian problem, is that we don't treat others, we don't look at others, especially those who aren't part of our own circle. And all of us have these circles, people that we get together. We get together with pretty much the same people all the time. We have the same circle of friends. It may be large, it may be small. Part of it's our relatives. But beyond that, the people aren't necessarily our enemies, but we don't consider them our friends, and we don't have to become friends with everybody. But Jesus says, love those people as well. There's a legend which may be true about Mother Teresa. And she was there in Calcutta, and she found a young child who was starving, who hadn't eaten, and she was shaking. So Mother Teresa went to a shop to get something for this girl to eat. And she said to the shopkeeper, could you please give her something to this child, because she's starving. And the shopkeeper turned to Mother Teresa and spat at her. And Mother Teresa said, well, thank you for that. Now, would you please feed the child? That's an attitude, and whether that's true or not. And we're not going to have anybody necessarily that spits at us. But it's going beyond what the other person may or may not say or do. Going beyond what we think of that person and loving them. And going to where Mother Teresa was there because of the love that she had for that little child. When I was in Japan, I'm sure I told you this story before, there was a gentleman who started coming to the church. He was interested in becoming a Christian. He would come to Mass. He would come to a Friday Bible study once in a while. And he was coming more or less for 6 months. And this gospel came up. And we had a Bible study after Mass on Fridays. Friday Mass was at 10, and we would discuss the gospel for the coming Sunday. This gospel came up, and he said, do we have to love our enemies? And I said, well, it's not easy, but that's what Jesus is telling us to do. And he left, and I never saw him again. I can't do that. I can't do that. And I'm hoping that none of us, even inside of us, not publicly, we would never say that, are not saying to ourselves, I can't do that. I can't love the people that annoy me. I can't love the people that I can't forgive. I can't love the people that I can't reconcile with, or that have alienated me, or in some way I feel they've hurt me. That's not what Jesus is calling us to do. He's calling us to love them.